Lake Superior swallowed a 729-foot giant in 1975, but the story did not stay buried. Unmanned cameras and eyewitness interviews keep exposing small details that change the entire timeline. 1. The ship was built like a moving steel factory. The SS Edmund Fitzgerald wasn't famous because it was glamorous. It was famous because it was big, fast, and efficient, a working freighter designed to carry taconite pellets that feed America's steel supply chain. According to the NTSB Marine Accident Report, the ship was 729 feet long, 75 feet wide, and powered by a 7,500 horsepower steam turbine. That size matters because, on the Great Lakes, bigger ships don't bob like small boats. They can get hit by waves with long, heavy impacts. The most important design detail for today's drone footage conversation is up top. 21 cargo hatch openings. Each opening had a steel hatch cover and a gasket, and each cover was secured with 68 manual clamps. In normal weather, that's routine. In a November storm, those hatches are the thin line between a wet deck and a flooded cargo hold. So when underwater cameras show hatch areas damaged, open, or missing covers, that isn't random wreck decoration. Those are the exact places where water could turn a tough ship into a sinking one, quietly at first, then all at once. 2. The final trip started like a normal shift. On November 9th, 1975, the Fitzgerald finished loading taconite in Superior, Wisconsin, then departed around 2:15 p.m., bound for Detroit. Another freighter, the Arthur M. Anderson, left later and traveled nearby. Nothing about that sounds like a legend. It sounds like a schedule. But weather was building. Both ships made a classic Great Lakes decision. They left the recommended lanes and hugged the Canadian shore to use the land as shelter. That's smart seamanship, until it isn't. Because the moment you turn back toward Whitefish Bay and open water, the lake is no longer partially blocked. You're exposed. This is where modern footage feels unexpected. Not because it reveals a monster wave, but because it forces you to accept something uncomfortable. The crew is doing normal, professional things. Route choices, radio checks, weather updates, right up until the lake removed every option.
Shipping vessels in the Great Lakes to breaking several records during its time of service, the SS Edmund Fitzgerald was regarded as a legendary ship, and it still is half a century later. During its final voyage, the mighty Fitz departed from the Twin Ports on November 9th, 1975, with the Arthur M. Anderson.
3. The first loud warning signs: vents lost, a list, and radar gone. By mid-afternoon on November 10th, the Fitzgerald reported damage that sounds small until you translate it into danger. A fence rail down, a couple of vents lost, and a list, meaning the ship was leaning. A list can come from wind and waves, but it can also mean water is collecting where it shouldn't. Then came the big problem: both radars were inoperative. In heavy snow and spray, radar is how you see hazards, shore, and traffic. The Fitzgerald asked the Anderson to track her and provide navigation help. That's a calm request, but it's also a sign the margin for error was shrinking. Around 7:10 p.m., the final reply came back: "We are holding our own." Minutes later, the Fitzgerald vanished from radar. No mayday was heard. That kind of silence usually means the end was sudden enough that talking became impossible.
The Fitzgerald left the Burlington Northern Docks here at Superior, Wisconsin, Sunday afternoon with a cargo of more than 26,000 tons of taconite ore pellets. She was bound for Detroit. The huge freighter was last heard from shortly after 7 o'clock last night when one of its officers radioed a nearby steamer to say the Fitzgerald was taking on water and had lost 2 hatch covers.
For Captain Bernie Cooper's 2 possibilities from the ship nearby. Captain Bernie Cooper of the Anderson wasn't guessing from a book years later. He was the nearby captain trying to keep track of the Fitzgerald in real time. In his on-camera interview, he narrowed the fatal problem to 2 possibilities. The Fitzgerald either bottomed out or suffered a stretch fracture of the hull. Either way, he believed the ship was sinking from that point on. That idea helps explain the weirdest part of this disaster: how the Fitzgerald could still be talking normally, while already losing the fight. Flooding doesn't always look dramatic from the bridge. Water can enter lower spaces first, adding weight, lowering freeboard, and making each new wave hit harder than the last. If the bow kept getting heavier, The ship could ride lower until one major wave turns the front end into a scoop. At that moment, the unsinkable feeling disappears, because steel has limits.
At 3:10 in the afternoon, she had either bottomed out or had a stress fracture of the hull. That's the only two possibilities I have. She was sinking from that time on. But my theory is that the water just finally built up on her, finally up in her bow, and she had so much on it, just started her down. And once she started down, the screw just drove her into the bottom.
5. The NTSB's bottom line: hatch cover collapse and sudden massive flooding. The official NTSB conclusion is blunt. The probable cause was the sudden massive flooding of the cargo hold due to the collapse of one or more hatch covers. That one sentence changes the vibe from mystery legend to engineering failure under extreme weather. The report also describes the setup. Before the collapse, there was likely flooding into ballast tanks and tunnel spaces from topside damage, plus flooding into the cargo hold through non-weather-tight hatch covers. That reduced freeboard and created a list. Then, heavy seas hit the hatch covers with forces strong enough to collapse them. Two contributing factors are especially important. The cargo hold lacked transverse watertight bulkheads, and freeboard reductions authorized by Great Lakes load line changes reduced safety margin. In simple terms, once water started winning, the ship didn't have enough internal walls to stop it. Another detail investigators highlighted was the incredible force of Great Lakes storm waves. Studies show that in severe November storms on Lake Superior, waves can reach heights of 25 to 30 feet, with occasional rogue waves even higher. When a fully loaded 729-foot freighter meets waves of that size, the pressure on deck structures becomes enormous. Each impact can slam thousands of tons of water across the hatch covers. If even a single hatch clamp failed, or a gasket loosened, water could enter the cargo hold slowly at first. Once inside, the heavy taconite cargo prevented the water from spreading evenly, creating dangerous weight shifts. That imbalance would have made the ship sit lower in the water with every passing minute. 6. The first underwater drone evidence. Curve 3 at 530 feet. People think underwater drones are a new thing. Investigators were already using unmanned systems decades ago. The NSB report describes a major survey in May 1976 using the U.S. Navy's Curve 3, an unmanned deep-diving vehicle with TV and still photography. It wasn't a quick look. The Curve 3 made 12 dives, logged over 56 hours on the bottom, and recorded 43,255 feet of videotape plus 985 color photos. That's not a vibe check, that's evidence gathering. And the evidence showed a broken ship, an upright bow section, an inverted stern section, and debris from a missing 200-foot midship portion. The report also notes hatch damage and missing covers, plus a vent near hatch number 5 torn away, leaving an opening at the vent base. So when modern footage reveals something, it's building on a long chain of unmanned imaging. What changes now is clarity, and how fast those details spread online. 7. The pilothouse door. A tiny detail that feels like a timestamp. One unexpected detail doesn't involve a hatch at all. It's the pilothouse door. On ships, that door is secured with heavy steel latches called dogs. In a storm, you don't casually leave it open. You dog it down so it stays sealed. That's the whole point. So when unmanned footage showed the dogs open and the door not broken, investigators immediately felt it meant something. It suggests someone deliberately unlatched it, likely because something was happening fast enough that staying put wasn't an option. This detail matters because it points to a final moment's reality. Movement, urgency, confusion. It supports the idea that the end was rapid, too rapid for a clean distress call, too rapid for organized abandonment. Maritime investigators often look for small mechanical clues like this because they act almost like timestamps. Equipment positions can reveal what the crew was doing seconds before disaster struck. If the door had been forced open by impact, the metal latches would likely show bending or breakage. Instead, the hardware appeared intact, which strongly suggested human action. Some experts believe a crew member may have opened it while preparing to move across the deck or communicate with another part of the ship. In extreme weather, crews frequently check equipment manually when alarms or unusual noises appear. If something critical had already gone wrong on deck, that door could have been opened during an urgent attempt to investigate the problem. 8. Why deep wreck footage is so rare on Lake Superior. The Fitzgerald lies around 530 feet down, and Lake Superior can change personality in minutes. Even with modern planning, you don't get endless chances. That's why ROVs and unmanned cameras matter. They don't need air. They don't get hypothermia. They can hold position and record the same angle again later. That repeatable viewing is how you turn I think into we can see. It also explains why the footage feels shocking when it's clear. You're seeing a workplace that disappeared with 29 people inside it. You're not watching a movie set. And every new pass matters, because small details are the difference between theories. A vent base torn open is a different story than a vent cap bent. A hatch cover collapsed is different than a hatch cover missing because of breakup. The lake won't answer questions, steel will. Lake Superior also preserves wrecks differently than oceans. The water is extremely cold and contains fewer organisms that normally break down metal and wood. Because of this, many shipwrecks on the lake remain remarkably intact even after decades underwater. However, the depth still creates enormous technical challenges. At more than 500 feet, the pressure is roughly 16 times greater than at the surface. Human divers cannot safely operate there for long periods, which is why robotic vehicles are essential. These remotely operated vehicles carry powerful lights, cameras, and robotic arms that allow scientists to study wrecks without disturbing them. Every expedition adds new measurements, new photographs, and occasionally details that earlier equipment simply couldn't capture. 9. The moment that makes it real. Seeing Edmund Fitzgerald on the bottom. Some footage doesn't feel unexpected because it's technical. It feels unexpected because it's personal. Rick Mixter described a moment when their sub turned, and the massive letters on the port side read Edmund Fitzgerald. The plates were crumpled from impact, but still readable through portholes. That is a human reaction to a physical fact. The ship isn't a legend. It's a place. That's why this story stays viral in the US. It's not ancient history. It's modern industry, radar, radio, shipping schedules, ending seconds. And that one readable name at the bottom turns the whole thing into a gut punch. Because it's not just a shipwreck. It's proof that the lake kept the ship, and the lake kept the silence. Moments like that are powerful because they connect cold engineering facts with human memory. For decades, the name Edmund Fitzgerald existed mainly in news reports, investigation documents, and Gordon Lightfoot's famous song. Seeing the actual steel letters on the hull removes the distance created by time. It reminds investigators that this ship was once a working vessel traveling regular commercial routes across the Great Lakes. Every rivet, ladder, and hatch was part of a routine job performed by experienced sailors. When the camera lights sweep across those letters on the lake bed, it becomes clear that the wreck is not just historical evidence. It is also a memorial to a crew whose final voyage ended far from shore. 10. The real point of every new clip. Remember the crew. The NSB report states that about 7:15 p.m. on November 10, 1975, the Fitzgerald sank in severe conditions, with all 29 officers and crew members missing and presumed dead, and no distress call heard. That's the core fact everything else sits on. Bruce Lynn from the Great Lakes Shipwreck Museum keeps the focus where it belongs. The first thing to think about is the crew. The ship is interesting and famous, but the crew is why the story matters. So when drone footage reveals the unexpected, the right takeaway isn't clickbait fear. It's respect, learning, and safety. Learn what a list can mean. Learn why vents and hatch closures matter. And remember that on Lake Superior, routine can turn deadly fast. Since the disaster, several safety improvements have been introduced across Great Lakes shipping. Modern freighters now follow stricter inspection rules for hatch covers, loading limits, and weather monitoring systems. Ships also carry more advanced radar, satellite communication, and emergency beacon technology that automatically sends distress signals if a vessel sinks suddenly. These upgrades cannot change what happened in 1975, but they reduce the chance of a similar tragedy repeating itself. Maritime historians often say the Edmund Fitzgerald disaster forced the industry to take storm safety and structural maintenance even more seriously. In that sense, the lessons learned from the loss of those 29 sailors continue to influence how ships operate on the Great Lakes today. The Fitzgerald still lies in two pieces in deep, cold water, but each new camera pass turns rumor into evidence. Remember the crew first. 29 men never came home, and every clue we learn should make today's Great Lakes voyages safer, smarter, and always more respectful of the lake. If you want more real stories behind history's most mysterious disasters, make sure to subscribe to the channel and stay with us for the next story.